Establishing a flank presence, this opening immediately challenges central pawns and opens diagonal lines for bishop development. Instantly developing a knight to the king's flank opens up the queen and bishop, preparing for rapid castling and central pawn expansion. Establishing central space immediately, this pawn push aims to disrupt black's knight and claim crucial territory. Embracing the fianchetto is a flexible choice, preparing a strong kingside presence. Asserting central presence, this piece bolsters the d4 pawn and prepares for pawn chain advancement, while restricting black's kingside dark square potential. Unlocking the long diagonal, the bishop eyes the heart of white's setup, preparing for a future kingside assault. Dominating the center with a pawn wedge, white stakes a claim and prepares to develop pieces harmoniously. Solidifying the center, this move prepares for a robust pawn chain and aims to restrict white's ambitious e-pawn. Establishing a fianchettoed bishop on the long diagonal is a classic idea to complement central control and eye the queenside. Safeguarding the monarch is paramount, tucking it away to prepare for central maneuvers and potential pawn breaks. Developing the bishop to a diagonal that already boasts pawn support solidifies control over the central squares and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Developing the knight now strengthens the central pawn chain and prepares for potential pawn breaks. Developing the knight to e2 prepares to castle kingside, while keeping the d4 pawn defended and potentially preparing for a kingside attack. Developing the bishop to the queenside establishes a dynamic tension, eyeing the d4 pawn and preparing for potential queenside expansion. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure prevents any immediate tactical thrusts from black's bishop or knight. Preventing bg5 and preparing for a kingside pawn advance, this subtle move reinforces black's defensive structure. Developing the bishop to pressure d6 and prepare for kingside expansion creates a harmonious piece setup. Securing the queenside flank allows for future queenside expansion, potentially with a pawn storm, while preventing white's knight from reaching b5. Preparing to launch the queenside majority, while subtly reinforcing kingside security and aiming for a central pawn break. Securing the monarch from potential skirmishes on the kingside is a sensible precaution, though it might slightly hinder piece development. Unlocking the f-file for an assault on the kingside, this aims to break open the position around black's castled monarch. A strategic retreat, preparing to redeploy the knight to a more active square, potentially the f6 or e7 outpost, while reinforcing the kingside pawn structure. Castling into safety, white finally anchors the king, preparing to contest central files and potentially unleash an attack on the queenside. Boldly confronting the center, black initiates a dynamic pawn liberation, aiming to shatter white's central grip and open lines for active piece play. Liberating the d-file opens immediate possibilities for white's rook, while black's pawn structure now faces scrutiny on the kingside. Opening the d-file liberates the queen and bishop, creating immediate counterplay against the kingside. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, white aims to shatter black's defensive structure and exploit the exposed monarch. Opening that kingside pawn structure now invites immediate tactical complications and potential weaknesses around your monarch. Opening the e-file exposes black's king, a calculated risk that may prove fatal if white can exploit the new lines of attack. This rook anchors the b-file, eyeing potential pressure and preparing to support pawn advances. Centralizing the rook immediately contests the d-file, aiming to pry open lines and exploit black's slightly passive pawn structure. The knight vacates the f-file, potentially opening it for white's rooks while preparing to contest the d-pawn's advance. Targeting the queenside's structural fragility, this knight infiltrates, eyeing weak squares and preparing to exploit the open b-file. Seeking to activate the bishop and contest the d-file, this maneuver repositions the piece for potential future skirmishes. Securing the d-file now becomes the primary objective for white's queen. Shifting the queen to the c8 square initiates a subtle positional recalibration, potentially targeting white's somewhat overextended kingside pawn structure. Unleashing a kingside pawn storm, this aggressive advance ignites a sharp positional struggle, aiming to dismantle black's defenses at all costs. Unleashing the rook from its defensive post, this maneuver prepares to challenge the open g-file, potentially forcing crucial exchanges. Unleashing a kingside storm, white seizes initiative by cracking open the g-file for immediate attack.